for us. We've got one short session now. Harry's going to take us through really what you're going to do tomorrow in the workshop. Is that right?
Indeed.
So I was going to think that, you know, the Shakespeare Company. Well, this is a bit like that, where we get the whole day and a really compressed nugget. Harry.
I'm not sure if it's going to be all that nice, but yeah.
Do you want this, or do you want to?
What I want more than anything else is the slides.
Sure. Set you up with this. Hope that works.
So yeah, I'm going to promote the workshop for tomorrow, which is about impact. And as I'm going to try to pick your brains, from experience, I know that if I put you in the right mindset today, you'll use your subconscious the whole night to process it, and then tomorrow morning you'll start a completely different person, and we'll get much more out of you. Which reminds me, I need to apologize to the people who unfortunately we can't have there. It's full. But I will make the promise that if it's actually good and Maria likes it, I will come back and do it. And in the spirit of Agile, Katie, I'm sure that there will be a much better workshop in the next round. So I've been talking for the last 7 years about Europeana, so I thought I'd give you an example from my own personal account. What you see here is a little website that I keep, which is about the history of my street. I live in The Hague in the Tollenstraat, a pretty unremarkable street in the center of The Hague. The street was built in the mid-1880s when the Industrial Revolution started to kick in and a rising Dutch middle class needed housing in the middle of the city. So in the past 130 years, it's run a fairly typical inner city course. It was bourgeois in the pre-war days. After the war, it went into a slightly decline mode. By the 70s and 80s, it was considered a very rough area in The Hague. You wouldn't want to be seen there in the middle of the night. And then by the 2000s, housing in the center of the city became popular again, and that's where I come in. Slightly, people like me started moving back into these housing. Now, together with my neighbor Saskia, who's an archivist, I dig out these little stories from the street. Usually we use the Municipal Photo Archive for that. Fantastic resource in The Hague. It's available online. Not in a fantastic format, I must say, but it's good enough for us to use. And my neighbor and I, we then dig out these stories, and usually what we do is we find a picture and then we twin that with a picture that I make myself of the exact same location, and then we try to imagine what happened or what the differences were, etc. And sometimes we hit some very interesting little things, and we're, for example, thrilled to find out that a Dutch rock star called Anouk lived there in 1982 to 1984. So yeah, and the person who told us that was the person living on number 33, which is on the right-hand side across the street from me. And to our great delight, because we posted that little story, the people from 140 figured out, hey, that's not only true, but the people living in our house, the guy living in our house, had a relationship with her, and actually their first child was from that little relationship. Trivial little stories. But the reason why I'm telling you this is that when we had these stories, we post these on our street app. And through these conversations, social fabric in our street is woven. You all know this. These are the types of things that happen. So over the years, crime rates in our street went down. Property prices went up. The quality of life in our street, I think, has increased. We now have block parties every summer. We alert each other when we see something happening in the street. Now, why am I telling you this? I think it's we can't, accord all this happiness and prosperity for the work of the Municipal Photo Archive in The Hague, right? However, if they would have been more conscious about this and actually start to get in contact with me, I'm sure that they would have been able to have a much more convincing story about the impact of their work to their funders. They would have been able to iterate much more quickly and given me all the stuff that I now basically steal from the website in openly licensed formats in much higher qualities. They would have created higher impact. Now, what this illustrates to me is that you, me, and everyone in this room share the same problem. We all believe that what we're doing is quite important, but we're not very good at expressing that in a language that the people who fund us really understand. So, and if we're not able to translate that to change in real well-being and welfare, I think we're in a pretty problematic space. And even if Karen keeps on funding us through the lottery, that's great. But you know, let's be fair. We've all been slashed with 40% or more for the past couple of years, and that is because we're not expressing well enough what we do in a more systematic way than we're currently doing, in my opinion. So, at Europeana, we toyed around with that notion a little bit. We started experimenting with some methodologies that we stole left and right, from business model canvassing to social impact indicators, statistic research, user research, etc. We applied that to a project, Europeana 1914-1918. We got some pretty good results out of that. In the workshop tomorrow, I'll show you what the results were. I don't have time for that, unfortunately, to do that here. This is it. There are three main notions that I want to plant in your brains for the people who come here and the people who might eventually work with us. These are the cornerstones of the work we're currently doing. The first one is that we need to think about impact areas, and we need to do that in a fairly systematic way. We can have impact on social cultural aspects, on the economy, improve welfare, but also by being fostering a more innovative and influential network. That's cornerstone one. The second one is that we started calling the impact pathway. So if we're being more systematic about what impact means for us, the end result of our activities, then we should be in a better position to understand what our mission is, what kind of activities should take place to make that mission happen, the output of that work, finally the outcome that is related to the impact. So this is impact pathway that we're using for our work. And what you'll see is that currently we are very conditioned to only look at KPIs that are related to output. How much stuff have we been able to produce? How often are people visiting our website? You can count it, but how related is that to the real impact that you're trying to show? So what we're trying to do is to see, can we take that one step further? Can we stretch our minds a little bit further out of that comfort zone and really look at what kind of outcomes do these outputs actually have as a result? So what kind of KPIs would we reattach to that? Those would be much more the behavioral ones that we just heard from the VNA. What kind of changes in attitudes, in behavior have we been able to see through our work? So that is the cornerstone number two. And the third one is what we call impact lenses. And these lenses enable us to have a more complete picture of the impact area that we're looking for. So not only should we see what kind of social, economic, and innovative impact we have, but how is that related to utility? How useful is the thing? How much learning have we encouraged? How much have we strengthened communities? And how much stronger is the legacy aspects of our work? Now, I'm not saying at all that we found the Holy Grail here, but I think that we're onto something, and we'd really love to work with you tomorrow and in the next 6 months to develop this into something really substantial. So, hope to come to see you tomorrow with an open mind, on time. 9 o'clock we start, and we finish promptly at 11. Bye. Thank you.
So I was waiting outside for the conversation.
Yeah.
So we are running slightly late. We started about 15 minutes late, so it's no surprise we're running a bit late. But I wonder if I could just maybe give ourselves 5 minutes. Would that be okay, Maria? I'm sure there's more than 5 minutes worth of conversation, which is why I know 5 minutes is the right answer for Q&A. Now, I've got a bunch of questions on my head, but it's not my job. So, who'd like to get going? Right in the middle. Could I ask you, please? I know it's maybe a bit late in the day, but could you say who you are and where you're from? That's okay. Thank you.
So it's a question for Karen. It's Alison from Frankly Green and Webb. It was interesting hearing the two presentations side by side. I mean, it seemed to me that HF has made like huge leaps in how it's thinking about digital. But what Kati alluded to, the problem with needing to commit to what you're going to create at the front of the project seems still to be in place for HLF. And I'm constantly seeing that causing real issues with projects on the ground. Is your thinking evolving or changing in that area?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Alison, thank you, because it doesn't just apply to digital either. It's a piece of thinking for us about something I probably should have put up. I probably should have put the list of HLF's 14 outcomes, but we'd have been here all day. And so I alluded briefly to some of them relating to heritage in better condition or people learning or communities. And the thing that applies to both digital and other types of projects, I think, is needing to specify those when you haven't done very much development work. So we're actually thinking as a whole about how you move not beyond outcomes, but how you might look at them differently and how that applies to what might be thought of as loosely an agile methodology, even for a community activity project, a more iterative cycle, a cycle in which you are investing more overtly in the process as well as the product. So yes, good point, but I take it very much about digital.
So can I follow up? So am I right in saying that those new instructions about digital are relatively new? I mean, they've come within the last 4 or 5 years. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, it's 2012.
Yeah. So the question I wanted to ask about that is the 5-year rule. Okay, making things available, having things available within 5 years. Now, we did some analysis for JISC in about 2010, looking at the JISC digitisation programme. And the JISC terms of reference were fairly clear that big digitisation projects were required to keep the material for a minimum of 5 years. And the interesting thing is all the Vice-Chancellors who signed up for those contracts read that completely the other way around. JISC asked for a minimum of 5 years. The contract, by virtue of how it was presented, made it the maximum of 5 years. And I wonder if we're 5 years in, whether we've learned anything, your experience in relation to trying to encourage that kind of sort of condition within the grant.
I think that's really interesting. I'd be interested to know in colleagues' views about whether you can keep something usable as intended for 5 years in the current environment. And remember that for us, some of it is digitisation in the sense of turning analogue into a digital format and making it available. But quite a lot of things are not. They are perhaps more ephemeral. Perhaps they are shorter life. Perhaps they do move on. I think the jury is probably still out. The balance always for any funder is about how great is the public return, the return for the public on what you've invested in, over what lifetime. And so we've tried it, but I'd be interested to know.
Yeah, actually, I think one of the problems we've had in the past couple of years is that there was always the need to have a sustainability plan at the end, which implied the project wasn't a success if you couldn't also sustain it for until, whenever. Instead of looking, like you were saying, what is the direct, immediate impact that you can have with it? So I would cut it out of your grant proposal.
I'm struck by, I'm remembering from sort of research data work and data science work, and I think I'm probably misquoting a little bit, but work at the Research Data Alliance, which is kind of the next field along, really, where they want to maintain long-term access to data for good reasons. I think it's Baron Mons there has identified 5% of total project budget as a necessary contribution to digital sustainability. And I'm thinking in my head, was it £7 billion? That's £350 million HLF, in some sense, would have been putting into digital sustainability. Is that something you would be thinking of, a percentage of grant?
It's interesting. I mean, we do we do think that way a little bit, and actually something I had to skip over in the speed to get through all of mine. I'm just thinking about Lorna Hughes in the back row up there. We've been having these discussions about one of the other areas I'm responsible for, which is the centenary of the First World War, where we've now funded 1,600 projects, most of whom have got the kind of digital things we saw on that screen. And having a conversation with Lorna about how, if I'm right, we think this is the most digitally documented period of history. Thank you, for affirmation up there. And where is all that stuff going? And actually, if we thought about that possibly at the beginning of the conversation about the centenary, we might have taken a strategic view that we were going to say to everyone, your grant is X, but we are also adding a percentage for you to be able to look at the sustainability, particularly the future discoverability of that material. Where is it going? But I'm very mindful that the sector also said to us, what capacity is there in archives, memory institutions and others to take that material? So in our very broad field, there isn't a natural home for any of that. It's a dilemma.
So there's some capacity building in different ways as well, isn't there? Well, I think the panel's getting off light. I suspect the desire for Prosecco is, if you'll forgive me, is getting in the way of a deeper conversation. Listen, you've all been kind enough to share contact details as well. The hashtag has been really, really active. So let's draw a close to this part of proceedings now. Let's thank very much our speakers for their wonderful contributions.